Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, and things adjacent. I'm just doing some mic adjustments, guys. Hopefully, my video is kind of in sync with my lips a little bit today. I don't know. Struggling with slowness of computer, mainly because of browsers. Also because the programs I use to make these videos make incredibly huge files, so I don't really need to give you all this technical detail stuff, but needless to say, it's just a lot of work to keep the memory clean. Let's look at some articles dealing with the ongoing crisis of climate change. 2 million in Zimbabwe's capital have no water as city turns off taps. This is from today. The situation is bad, period, says spokesman for Harare Council, as suburbs go weeks without water and cases of typhoid are reported. More than 2 million residents around Zimbabwe's capital have no access to running water as drought and breakdowns push the city system to collapse. Just 50% of 4.5 million people in Harare and 4 satellite towns currently have access to the municipal water supply, the city authority told Climate Home News. There is a rotational water supply within the 5 towns. Harare City Council Corporate Communications Manager Michael Chideme said, some people are getting water 5 days a week, especially in the western suburbs, but the northern suburbs are going for weeks without a drop in their taps. I'm wondering if the western suburbs are where the rich people live and the northern suburbs are where the really poor people live. I'm betting my guess is correct. Chideme said people were either depending on water merchants, open wells, streams, or several council-drilled boreholes. The situation is bad, period. Dr. Jean-Marie Kaleshi from WaterNet warned Harare's water was highly polluted. Waterborne diseases linked to these boreholes are on the rise, but people have had to take in their own hands water supply because the utility has failed to provide water. Cities around the world are facing increased water stress. Last week, the Indian city of Chennai began using trains to ferry in emergency supplies after rains failed. In 2018, Cape Town in South Africa avoided a citywide water network shutdown by just a few months. Zimbabwe is getting warmer as the climate changes and heavy rains and droughts are becoming more intense. In Harare, rains are expected in October at earliest, according to James Ngoma of the Zimbabwe Meteorological Services Department. So that is a situation that we're seeing more frequently around the globe. I'm going to move on, though, because I have a lot of stories to cover and an article to read. This is from the New York Post. This is from July 12th. Birds are falling from the sky, bleeding from their eyes and beaks. It could have been a scene out of an Alfred Hitchcock fright film, but it was happening in real time. So say bird rescuers who found a chilling scene in South Australia this week when birds were falling from the sky and subsequently discovered in trees and on the ground bleeding from their beaks and eyes. More than 60 corellas, a species native to the continent, have died since being found in the town of Adelaide Tuesday and Wednesday. Of those, the vast majority were long-billed corellas, a protected species in Australia, while a few were little corellas, an unprotected species considered by many to be a pest that deserves gassing. Unlawful killing of long-billed corellas, however, is an offense punishable with fines or jail time. Although some of the birds found alive were taken to veterinarians, they couldn't be saved, the BBC reports. The scene looked like a horror movie. Sarah King, founder of a bird rescue group that sent a staffer to the incident, tells the outlet the birds weren't able to fly and were lying on the ground wailing in pain. Some birds were bleeding out of their mouth. That immediately made us think of poisoning, which we've seen before. The Corella deaths are now being investigated by the Australian government with poisoning suspected. Lovely, lovely things are happening to animals, and I mean, by lovely, I mean disgusting, happening to animals all over the planet. This is from July 12th, 2019. Chevron spills 800,000 gallons of oil and water in Kern County Canyon. California authorities said Friday that crews are beginning to clean up a massive oil spill that dumped nearly 800,000 gallons of oil and water into a Kern County canyon, making it larger if less devastating than the state's last two major oil spills. The seep, which has been flowing off and on since May, has again stopped, said Chevron spokeswoman Veronica Flores Paniagua with the last flow Tuesday. She and California officials said the spill is not near any waterway and has not significantly affected wildlife. Well, that's, reassuring. Chevron reported that 794,000 gallons of oil and water have leaked out of the ground where it uses steam injection to extract oil in the large Simric oil field about 35 miles west of Bakersfield. The steam softens the thick crude so it can flow more readily, a different process from fracking, which breaks up underground layers of rock. About 70% of the leaked fluid is water, Chevron said, meaning about 240,000 gallons of the mixture is oil. This year, a judge fined Plains All-American Pipeline nearly $3.35 million for causing what had been the worst California coastal spill in 25 years. A corroded pipeline spilled 140,000 gallons of crude oil in 2015 onto Refugio State Beach in Santa Barbara County, tarring popular beaches for miles, killing wildlife, and harming tourism and fishing. So it just goes on and on and on. Oil leaks everywhere, and I don't believe for a second that this didn't harm any wildlife. Not yet, anyways. Moving on to really alarming and disgusting news out of the White House. White House approves military to use lethal force at the southern border. So basically, I skimmed through this article, and they're saying, like, okay, then, the military won't be around any actions, and they still are, not able to do police type things because of the military, and they can't do that on national soil, on domestic soil. But they're approved to use military force, so that just means, if you just happen to be around and see something go down and you feel like it necessitates lethal force, and go ahead and, unleash boys. Not good. I'm going to link this below. Well, let's just read a few sentences. The White House has authorized active duty military troops stationed along the southwest border to use lethal force, if necessary, a significant escalation of the support role they had been tasked with that may run afoul of a 140-year-old law that generally bars the military from operating within U.S. boundaries. White House Chief of Staff John Kelly signed a memo late Tuesday expanding the mission of the 5,800 troops to include protecting customs and border protection agents. That represents a sharp change in the orders given to troops currently deployed in California, Arizona, and Texas, who had been lining the border with concertina wire and providing only logistical support to the CPB personnel. Defense Secretary James Mattis, otherwise known as Mad Dog Mattis, confirmed the new guidelines to reporters on Wednesday, but downplayed the level of interaction his troops will have with migrants. He said most troops aren't carrying weapons and that the military would stay away from civilian law enforcement roles, such as arrests, which are forbidden under the Posse Comitatus Act. Then why allow them to use lethal force? They're not armed and they're not near anybody, but we're going to allow them to use lethal force. Okay. So one of these things does not line up or add up. This on top of the fact that the president is a flaming racist. Just an absolute fucking moron. Despicable moron at that. Let's hurry, come on 2020. let's get somebody else. Let's get this buffoon the hell away from the White House. ASAP. I'm going to finish up with this article from The Spinoff from July 1st, 2019, an apology from an environmentalist. I have worked for the last 15 years or so as a professional in various parts of the environmental movement, and I'm sorry. I was one of the people who told you changing your light bulbs or buying organic couscous would make things okay. I was wrong, and I knew I was wrong at the time. I was one of the people who wrote about the successes of the charities I worked for. I knew full well that we were losing the natural world hand over fist. I started working for my first major environmental NGO in 2003. I translated the stuff the wildlife boffins were doing into stuff people give money to. The boffins wanted to post out their PhD thesis with an invoice. The fundraisers wanted to send ransom notes with "give us the money or we mince the panda." I wanted a proper job. I wanted to build myself a future, so I tried for some sort of compromise. I flew to the Amazon. I helped investigate a new road for trucking the rainforest out and turning it into toilet paper. I flew to Borneo. I visited the orangutan our donors could adopt. It wisely threw its own shit at me until I went away. I racked up more CO2 emitting air miles with environmental NGOs than for any other reason. I moved to New Zealand and got married. I worked as a fundraising consultant for several global NGOs. I wrote green sections for magazines and newspapers. I saved up for a house. In all of these jobs, my bosses told me that I shouldn't scare the horses. I shouldn't tell the truth of the encroaching horrors I researched all day. Otherwise, people might give up, or in other words, stop sending us money. I complied. I wanted the money, and I'm sorry. This is what most of the environmental movement has become. It is one of the major reasons it has failed. I am not about to bore you with page after page of evidence. It's self-evident. Approach any news channel with any kind of honesty, and it will show you the failure with constant updates of catastrophe after catastrophe. Being honest about this feels like a kind of heresy. Even now, I am using a pseudonym so I can keep my day job in another environmental organization. That should be a major warning sign. When did reality become so unpalatable that we shouldn't tell people about it? Since when did so many of us need to be treated like children? Why do those of us who know about these things have to disassemble, distract, or blatantly lie about the state of our world? It feels calming to finally open up, if only to myself, to allow what I know to be true to flood in and flood out of me. Because only then can we start to really deal with it on its own terms. It's now clear to me that not scaring the horses is as irresponsible as standing in a burning building selling wet napkins instead of shouting fire. The truth is, I don't know much that you don't know already. It's either deep down or, as in my case, a continuous kind of mental tinnitus you notice when things get quiet. The Bible had 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: conquest, war, famine, and death. What we are currently reading in our 24/7 news feeds looks more like the final charge of the apocalypse brigade riding those Harley Davidsons with their exhausts sawn off. You have to have your fingers in your ears and sing la 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 to miss it. Climate change, mass extinction, topsoil loss, antibiotic-resistant disease, water pollution, air pollution, nuclear holocaust, financial collapse, and more are joining the human hunt. They don't look like the sort of characters who negotiate. For many of us, a thundering onset of climate change is what woke us from our slumber. This is the hardest to ignore. The latest comprehensive view from the deeply conservative Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change went something like this. Within the next 12 years, we just need to put aside all our differences and peacefully orchestrate a massive and abrupt slowdown of the world's economy without destroying it. Meanwhile, we need to pull carbon out of the air with gadgets that we haven't invented yet, or we're fucked. Maybe I shouldn't have tried to make a living by campaigning on climate change. Anyone who has made any serious attempt at following the logic through realizes that we are actually campaigning against industrial colonialist civilization. Ding, ding, ding. For anyone in the industrialized world, this is the source of all of our wealth. It's what pays all our wages. Good luck sawing down the tree branch you are sitting on. By now, the Earth's immune system has rightly identified us as a virus. It's firing up its antibodies and stimulating a fever to rid itself of the disease. We are like any other organism, much like bacteria with access to an abundant energy source, in our case, fossil fuels. We fill up our petri dish. We engulf or expel everything else. When we run out of energy and resources to exploit, the overblown population crashes back to something manageable, or it dies off completely. It's not evil, it's just the way life works. Of course, we have convinced ourselves that since we have tin openers and smartwatches, we are no longer subject to such natural processes. That is a large part of our problem. Today, the imminent breakdown of the industrialized civilization isn't even a fringe view. It's all over the mainstream media if you care to look, or even if you simply don't deliberately look away. The very idea of a breakdown in industrial civilization suggests an interpretation of civilization that is culturally biased and fundamentally wrong. We have been conditioned to believe civilization is a state of high progress, hence breakdown. This blithely and brutally ignores the billions of people for whom this civilization is apocalyptic and always has been. Check your history. Every time this particular civilization turns up somewhere, it signals the violent overthrow of the native population and the armed robbery of everything valuable. Spot on. New Zealand is a textbook case. The ongoing processes in Iraq and Afghanistan are the most obvious current examples. Or the Amazon, or Jakarta, or, whatever. One of our massive blind spots is that we tend to view industrialized civilization as normal when in fact it's very weird. The industrialized population exists on a ludicrously unlikely living planet in the richest 1% during a period of wealth unprecedented in all of human history. That's not normal. I am not wildly successful or talented. I have tended to work in non-management for charities where wages are not high, yet I can feast better than any medieval king every day of the week. I can buy out-of-season exotic foods from all over the world and then throw them away when I forget to eat them. To think it outlandish to suggest this may not last forever is itself odd. It's only the depth of our delusion that makes forecasts of a much poorer and more vulnerable way of life seem unlikely. In fact, nearly every other human's life on Earth now and throughout history has been poorer and more vulnerable than ours. We are a culture of Marie Antoinette, stuffing our faces with cake and idly wondering what that intriguing new scaffold outside might be for. The environmental movement was supposed to do something about all that, but it's lost its way. We were blindsided by climate change, even though we had known about it for more than a century. The only way I can explain that is to quote a Sudanese farmer. When asked why the rich countries weren't helping to relieve their famine, he said, "You can't wake a person who is pretending to be asleep." All of us who have feasted off the carcass of a dying planet bear some responsibility, but those of us who got paid to know what was happening and failed to find a way to tell you have our own special blame to carry, and for that I am truly sorry. From now on, I will try to be honest with you. And then he says the name he's writing under, Jack Thomas, is a pseudonym. just a touch of irony. But anyways, other than that, really, really great article. I hope you all enjoyed that. Once again, called An Apology from an Environmentalist. I will list all these below. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.